Hello, and hello, everybody. Welcome back for another episode, if not now, when? Today, we are super excited, and I am, to meet Paul O'Brien, the one and only. Paul, today.
That's how we're going to start.
That's how we're going to start.
Hi, everybody.
Let me tell you a little bit about Paul. As a longtime Silicon Valley technology and startup veteran, Paul has been in Austin for over a decade now and is heavily involved in the booming startup ecosystem right here in Austin, Texas. Wow. He has been working at a crossroads of economic development and venture capital. Today, Paul is a founder and CEO of MediaTech Ventures, a venture development company in media. Today, he worked to bring Founder Institute and MassChallenge in Texas. He also served on the board of a number of startup incubators and accelerators, and is also managing director of venture capital programming in Founder House. With that, everybody, please join me to welcome Paul to the show. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you very much. It is wonderful to see you. Thank you for having me here.
Of course. Thank you, Paul. Wow. We are so honored and super excited. So tell us, Paul, how does all the magic begin? Like, you have a long listing, journey.
How does the magic begin? There's a bit of magic. I think there's a bit of magic in what someone like me does, and the magic actually stems from or comes from struggles. And in struggles, getting really passionate and fixated with the fact that it shouldn't be that difficult, and that we can make it easier for people.
What was the struggle you mentioned specifically?
I've just been through a series of, everybody's been through struggles. My series of struggles, I suppose, just kind of painted a picture about life and entrepreneurship and economic development. I grew up in Michigan when the economy was kind of rough. And then, as y'all heard, I ended up in Silicon Valley for a while when it was literally kind of the opposite of that.
What brought you there when that time was not quote unquote sexy or fancy?
No, it was the sexy time to be there. I got recruited to Yahoo in 1999.
Wow.
Back when, what would be the equivalent of Yahoo today?
Google?
Maybe?
Tesla?
Maybe? It's a good question, though. Think about it. Listeners, call in, text in. Whatever the equivalent of, I say Google maybe. Think of like Google in the 2010s.
Yes.
Right? If Google called, you took the job. You went, right?
Yep.
And so back in the early O's, when Yahoo called, you took the job. It was the internet. And so that pulled me up to Silicon Valley, and I had a wonderful time and a wonderful experience there. But then when I was 34, I had cancer. And so here I am in the most expensive place in the world, flush with capital and also innovation and entrepreneurship, and everybody working overtime, and kids came along, and cancer came along, and then the mortgage crisis came along, and it was a combination of things that gave me this worldview that there's an economy that we can develop to help entrepreneurs, and that's what steered me to do that. That it shouldn't be so hard, whether we're sick or we're disadvantaged or we're economically struggling. It shouldn't be this difficult to make it in this world and to thrive.
How did you recover from that moment of challenges?
I don't know that you do recover. I actually think you become a better person. Well, see, I say better talking about myself, so I hope it's true. I don't think you really recover. When you're in your 30s and you experience something like that, cancer, it just changes your entire outlook on life, right? Different priorities suddenly become more important.
How so?
You've faced death. You realize you might not make it to 110 or whatever the ideal is these days. And so suddenly. In my case, suddenly financial motivations as an entrepreneur took a backseat to more ethical or moral motivations that I felt like I kind of had a responsibility to do something to improve the world, and if not the world, at the very least to send a better message to my own kids. about how to make a difference in the world.
Wow. And are you well today, Paul?
I am. Yeah. No. Cancer's an awful and interesting thing because there's certain forms of it that are just horrific, and thankfully to the healthcare industry are slowly getting treated and getting dealt with. Mm-hmm. And then there are other forms of cancer which is kind of what I had. There are other forms of cancer where the survival rate's pretty high, but at the same time, the medical community isn't doing much about it because they know they could just kind of remove it and you'll be fine. And so I was told over the phone. There's a funny commercial on the air right now about somebody having cancer, and you could see the guy being told he has cancer, which is just, doctors, by the way, is a terrible way to tell people they have cancer. So I got a phone call that literally just kind of said, "So I'm sorry to tell you, Paul, but you have cancer." And think of your reaction in your brain when you just go, "What?"
You remember that moment?
I have what? Oh gosh, yes, standing in our small townhome in Los Gatos, California. It's the only moment, right? It's one of those moments in life that you will remember forever, that crystallizes everything in a different light. Mm. And that's why you don't fully recover, right? Even though I had a form that was not likely to end my life, and could be remedied. Mm-hmm. At the same time, it's in your head forever.
It's
right?
an emotional impact.
Yeah, it's a mental impact that, like I said, or I like to think, and I like to talk about or help people work through those hardships taken in the right light and the right mindset actually present new opportunities. Right? They change our worldview, and hopefully for the better.
So how does that event change the course of your later journey? At the time, you were in California in one of the hardest company, working overtime, all the fun things. How the journey took from there?
Well, so there were two different incidents. I went from Yahoo to Hewlett-Packard and learned very quickly that the corporate world wasn't suited to somebody like me. and so I followed the advice of some angel investors and got involved in the startup ecosystem as what's considered a fractional CMO. And I'd launched a few startups at a time, and I was pretty good at that. And then I had cancer. And so that it's that combination of things, experiencing what Michigan was like back when the economy was a little rough up there, and then experiencing the opposite of that, both at some big companies and then at the startup stage, and then having something again kind of detrimental happen that makes a person look at that and go, all right, there are a lot more people in the world than the people here in Silicon Valley, and there's certainly a lot of people who are struggling economically, like I grew up in Michigan, or with health, as I had just experienced. There has to be a better way to make this available to everybody, everywhere. Make these opportunities and venture capital and good mentorship available to everybody in the world. And that took us to Denver. Not literally took us to Denver, but if you think of 12 years ago, the hottest place in the world for startups outside of Silicon Valley was probably Denver. And so when we looked to move, of course, everybody was like, "You got to go to Denver." And I just thought, no, it's too cold. I don't want to go to Denver.
Then you went.
So we didn't. We didn't go to Denver. Think of 12 years ago. Techstars is from Denver, right? Everybody, Techstars and Galvanize. There's some great startup industry brands that have come out of Denver. And well before this Texas boom that we now find ourselves in, or the Midwest boom even that we now find ourselves growing into as Chicago and Detroit and some other cities really start to thrive. Back then, it was Denver. That if you were going to leave Northern California to do something in the startup ecosystem, New York made sense, I suppose, or Denver. And because I grew up in Michigan, no, I certainly was not going to go there. So we looked at, everybody, it's kind of a neat exercise to work through as you think about where you want to be in the world. We literally looked at a map of the country that was on our wall, my wife and I, and we drew a line kind of halfway north and south of the United States and said, all right, we're not moving anywhere north of this line. It's just too cold. Yeah, and back then that was a bit of a challenge because that gave you LA or San Diego, it gave you Phoenix, it gave you Santa Fe, Dallas, Houston. Austin really wasn't as prominent as it is today, so it really wasn't something we'd considered foremost. Actually, Dallas was a little bit more considered. Now Miami or Nashville are popular, but then again, 12 years ago weren't necessarily a destination for startup ecosystems, and so we were a little stuck, and we visited half a dozen cities and felt lost, to be honest, and ended up. On a wing and a prayer, came down to Austin for a weekend as kind of a last-ditch effort because I'd been to South by Southwest a dozen times and loved the music and the convergence of the film industry with the technology industry that happens at South by Southwest. Mm-hmm. And I discovered the hill country and the lakes out west, which is kind of how I grew up. Mm-hmm. And we just fell in love with the city of Austin. And we moved about 4 weeks later and just threw caution to the wind and said, we'll figure it out when we get there.
Wow. Such an entrepreneurial mindset.
Yeah, or something, something's really neat happening in the world today that I just wrote about that I referred to as the Great Migration. And what I think is neat that's happening in the world today is that we're all shifting. We've sort of referred to it as the Great Resignation. Mm-hmm. All these people quitting under the circumstances of terrible employers or having to be in the office. But at the same time, we've discovered we can work remotely. We've discovered we can work anywhere in the world. We've discovered that thanks to quarantine, we've discovered we can work at home. Mm-hmm. Right? Blessings in disguise.
Yeah.
Out of cancer comes opportunity. That out of bad things, I'm really excited about the fact that I think what we're seeing in the world today is what some of us have called this Great Migration, where we're all moving somewhere else, whether it's a job or it's out of the office or it's across the country or across the world. I think we're sort of entering a new era of humanity where people recognize that they can thrive under circumstances that they have more control over, and they're choosing their own destiny. And I think that's exciting.
And speaking of pivoting, speaking of choosing a destiny, Paul, is it always easy for you to pivot, for you to shift, for you to really choosing to see the bright side regarding the circumstance?
It's certainly not easy. I'm a bit of an advocate of the idea that the word entrepreneur refers to a rather actually unusual type of person.
How so?
If you've read, and I highly encourage at least the blog post about it or a podcast about it. If you've read Smith's Wealth of Nations, it's one of the earliest books about the economy, and it's a studied book because it gets into most of our traditional, typical concepts of businesses and merchants and how the economy works and so on and so forth. And a gentleman by the name of Jean Baptiste Say read the book and thought, hang on a second, there's this certain type of person that's unusual. They're incredibly risk tolerant. They keep doing different things, and that person isn't in Smith's book. What is that person? And so Say coined the term entrepreneur, trying to identify not the person who necessarily starts businesses, but the person who is always willing to dive into something else professionally, who's always willing to take on that risk, that personal risk, and more often than not fails. The pivots are hard. More often than not fails, but it's out of those attempts and out of those many, many, many failures, trying new things that the world discovers and uncovers new things, and hopefully forges different paths that make it better for everybody else.
Do you always know that you are those people?
Did I always know that I was one of those people? No, but maybe in hindsight, maybe in hindsight I did. I'm a closet introvert, but I got myself into theater.
What?
Yeah.
You don't strike me as introvert, not even a small percentage.
That's my dad's advice. And if I could impart that to every parent out there, including my own kids, get into public speaking. Take a media class in high school. Get on stage, force yourself to learn to communicate better and get comfortable in front of audiences, because it's not a skill easily taught. You have to practice it. So do it. And that's what my dad said in high school. He's like, "You're taking a communications class." And so I did. I took public speaking and theater, and that if I look at my past, I've always been into computers. I built computers, but I'm not an engineer. I've dabbled in theater. I took a car apart in college and put it back together, just trying to figure it out. So I suppose in hindsight, yes, I maybe have always been like that, but I didn't realize it at first. Who goes to HP when they to work at a big company when they really have that entrepreneurial spirit?
When did you realize? When is that light bulb moment shift? You realize, wow, this is a great company, but I'm gonna forge a different path.
Honestly, only recently. In the birth of MediaTech Ventures, recently being years ago now, but a few years ago now.
Tell us more.
That my experience coming to Austin was not as professionally positive as I had hoped. And I'm happy to talk about that more. I'm trying to put it into words.
Why?
That when you do the work that many of us do and many of us want to do for and with startups, it's a very, very different culture than a job. It's a very, very different culture than working in a company. And I use the word culture because it's such a distinct aspect of society that it's very, very foreign to almost everybody. To work for startups, to be explicit, right? If you want to be the type of person who works for startups, not necessarily a founder, right? Or an investor for that matter, but you want to work for startups. You like startups. You want to have a career in that line of work. It's a very different culture because you have to get comfortable with the fact that in all likelihood, the startup that you're working for will be gone in 6 months. It'll be gone in 12 months. And so you really have to change your mindset to the fact that, you're not talking to recruiters. You're not really applying for jobs. You're filling roles, and the roles change drastically, constantly. And Austin, to be frank, in most of the world, I'm sure your listeners can appreciate, most of the world doesn't have that kind of culture, doesn't think that way, isn't comfortable with constant change.
Austin?
Absolutely not. And still is quite a bit different than Silicon Valley, to be sure. That my experience working with startups 20 years ago was you work for 3 at a time because why on earth would you only work for one? Odds are the one's going to fail.
Yeah.
Odds are the 3 are going to fail, right? And for the most part, whether you're in marketing or you're a developer or you're in sales, for the most part, depending on the stage of the startup, it's all the same stuff. It really is. That's kind of the secret of entrepreneurship, everybody. It's all the same stuff, right? If you're a Series A startup, marketing is generally the same. Sales is generally the same. You're selling something different, obviously, or you're building something different. But the technical characteristics of what that startup has to do at that time is typically similar. And so it's not difficult it wasn't difficult to take on 2 or 3 at a time. And, you don't work 9 to 5, right? You kind of work all the time. So you work 8 o'clock in the morning till 2, and then you work on a different one for, till the evening. And then maybe at night you crank in another startup that's at a different stage and maybe you're easier to help. And there's an appreciation and a recognition of the fact that you probably won't be there in a year. Either because the startup will fail or because they'll change to a different stage. And when they change to a different stage, they probably need different people, right? So a startup ecosystem generally has a very, very, very mobile, very transitory set of professionals who are used to being at completely different places almost constantly.
Speed dating.
Very much so. And in most cities, your listeners, Austin was like this, and actually is still very much like this. You can be a very tech-centric city. Austin was a very tech-centric city. That's not the same as being an entrepreneurial and startup-oriented city, right? Because you can work at a tech company for 20 years. You can work at a very innovative company for a long time. It's not the same as startups. Tech and startups are not the same. And so Austin was a place where when I arrived, and I met with, honestly, I met with the VCs here, the venture capitalists here in Austin, and they'd ask for my resume. I'm like, what do you mean my resume? what does my resume have to do with anything? I'm here for you to tell me what kind of startups you are involved in so that you can figure out where you need be. This isn't an interview.
Yeah.
I haven't interviewed in 15 years, right? It was just this very still kind of traditional corporate HR-oriented, career path-oriented, you work at a company for 15 years culture. Mm-hmm. Austin's changed a little bit, to be sure, but it's still quite a bit like that. It's still a lot like a more traditional economy where even people who want to work with startups or work in startups here in Austin have the mistaken mindset that if they get a job at a startup, they'll probably be there for 2 or 3 years. And I hate to break it to y'all, but there's a 99% likelihood that you won't be there in 3 years. And so if you want to work with startups in general, you have to change your thought process. You have to change your expectations, and you've got to mature as an economy or as a city. You've got to mature a culture that's much more mobile, much more flexible. Let's just keep moving on. Let's keep pivoting, to use your word, right? Keep pivoting to whatever might be next, and dismiss or move on from the failures as quickly and efficiently as we can.
Speaking of failures, Paul, I wonder, is there any failure that you remember back in your earliest career that you had a significant impact on you and that shaped who you are today?
Without question. At Yahoo, I largely worked in e-commerce. Mm-hmm. And at HP, I actually worked for HP Shopping, commerce, retail.
Oh.
Retail for HP. Obviously, now I work in media innovation. And a big part of the reason for that is that my early career was mostly in commerce and retail. Mm-hmm. And so when I got pulled into startups and had a couple of successful startups working for other people's startups, I figured I could do this. And so I started an e-commerce company, drop shipping product. And
before Amazon?
No, about the same time.
Okay.
Right? But before Amazon.
Really? Yeah.
Before Amazon. And here I am. I know how to build websites. I know how to set up commerce. I know how to connect APIs. And I've been successful in online marketing. And I thought this will be a piece of cake. Well,
was it?
I certainly did not have any exposure to fintech. And that side of the equation. Great lesson in why teams are so critical to startups. Teams are so critical to startups that here I am trying to do it myself, figuring I learned all the lessons I need to. And about 2 months into this company that I'd kicked off, started getting an explosive number of sales. And I was
great.
Thrilled, right? It's wonderful. I was thrilled. Then about a week later, I get a call from the FBI, curious what I was doing with all this merchandise that was being acquired, and it was a very unusual call. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, what do you mean? What the merchandise I'm acquiring? And they said, well, we're trying to figure out whether or not you're involved in this conspiracy that we're exploring, where a lot of folks are fraudulently placing orders and buying merchandise and then selling it on the black market. And that's what happened to me. I had been taken advantage of, frankly, and ended up, I don't know, $50,000 or $60,000 worth of product in the hole when fake credit cards, right? How fintech works, something I didn't know. Fake credit cards and managing customers properly.
Oh no!
Took me to the bank, right? And so with that investigation happening, and then frankly this revealing this insight to my ignorance, I actually just shut it down. I thought this isn't what I'm interested in doing. This didn't really align with my passion, and evident in my making mistakes and learning some hard lessons. I'm going to start exploring some other things. I'm going to start learning more, and that's really how I got into working with startups much more, was figuring, you know what, I'm gonna continue to focus on what I do well and do that for other people as much as I possibly can until I figure out my real path in life, my real purpose in life.
Was that failure hard to take at the moment?
Yeah, yes and no. yes and no. Almost no in the sense of, it's a lot of money, but at the same time, a bit of a perspective to appreciate too about working for startups is the fact that most founders lose money. That everyone too, if you want to work for startups and you want to make $200,000 a year, good luck. It's not, we don't work with startups. We don't work in the startup ecosystem for financial reasons. We really don't. If you want to get rich, invest in real estate, and if you want to have a productive, successful career, go work for a company. So it was painful, but losing that amount of money relative to not necessarily making anything anyway, right? Or relative to having spent money to try to start something already anyway. At the end of the day, that's an annual salary for a lot of people. So yeah, it certainly hurt, but that's why I call it a painful lesson more than being destructive or just the end of the world, because it.
How do you not let it to be end of the world?
I think it's that entrepreneurial spirit. I think it's that personality that says, hey, this is what happens. Because it is, right? This is what happens. Imagine being an angel investor or venture capitalist. They lose, by the way, everybody, they lose a lot more money. A lot more money, right? Because they're putting in millions.
Yeah.
So when you put it in perspective about what it means to work as an entrepreneur, what it means to work with startups, you either feel comfortable with that and you move forward, as few people do, or you take your lumps and you go get a job again, as most people do. You discover yourself.
What do you discover about yourself, Paul?
That I was comfortable with it. That I was comfortable with it. I'm not sure my wife appreciates that I'm so comfortable with it, but I really discovered that I was comfortable with taking on those personal risks myself. I was comfortable with not being wealthy. I was comfortable with the fact that for us to try, for anyone to try to be innovative, to be entrepreneurial, you have to be comfortable with the fact that you're probably going to lose things along the way. And in discovering I was comfortable with that, it enabled me to take greater risks and try different things. It enabled us to jump to Austin on a wing and a prayer, and it enabled me to in time visualize and create this vision for MediaTech Ventures and what we're trying to do for the economy and startups in general. I don't think that those moves, I don't think those migrations, I don't think that change would have been possible if I hadn't experienced something hard to help me realize that you survive that you can get through that and you could thrive on the other side.
So tell us about the other side. Tell us more about MediaTech Venture, why you started, what is the mission behind, all the fun things.
For the last 10 years, the world has had a lot of thought leaders and politicians and influencers trying to coin these changes as the metaverse most recently, or distributed computing, and before that, the digital revolution, right? If you look at all the pundits, they're always trying to explain what's been going on in the world and in the economy. And I try to put it rather simply, which is that in the last 10 years, the world has been waking up to the fact that our entire existence now is dependent upon the internet. I challenge anybody listening to prove me wrong. Frankly, you wouldn't be listening if I was wrong. But I challenge anybody to prove me wrong, because, you may not work on the internet, right? You may not work online, but the fact is you're getting products delivered to you that way. And your car has a map thanks to the internet. And you're probably booking classes in school or applying to college thanks to the internet. Literally everything. Humanity is now in what was coined 25 years ago is what's now referred to as the information age. The information age essentially means absolutely everything that humanity knows is available on demand, including everybody's opinion, thanks to social media, right? Everybody's opinion, everybody's perspective. But what many people still don't fully appreciate and realize is that fact that everything is freely available. All knowledge is freely available. It's just out there. You just got to know where to find it and how to find it. And that revolution took place 25 years ago. So my point about the last 10 years is that it's only in the last 10 years I've come to appreciate. It's only in the last 10 years that most of the world is starting to realize that. But it happened a long time ago. It happened a long time ago because it was largely stuck in Silicon Valley, right? That everybody in Silicon Valley kind of experienced it firsthand, whether it was eBay or Amazon or AOL or Yahoo or Google and Facebook. The internet was largely defined by and built by there, outside of a Spotify in Europe or subtle occasion somewhere else. Well, in the last 10 years, every other industry has sort of had this light bulb go off, right? The transportation industry, the shipping industry, the CPG industry, the finance industry, these light bulbs have been going off as people have gone, what does this mean when we can connect with absolutely everybody in the world and get all of the information we possibly need? It's revolutionary. It's evolutionary. It's disruptive. And in media in particular, media being everything from advertising to music, video games, podcasting, film, the news, you've certainly experienced my point, right? So in the last 10 years that media in a very broad context has just been completely turned over. We had fake news, the fake news scandal for a reason. We're now exploring the metaverse and NFTs. How we consume music is different, right? We've had VR emerge, and if you haven't played with an Oculus or HoloLens yet, you absolutely should. It's the coolest kind of experience you can imagine. None of this stuff existed 15 years ago. And so we've got an entire sector of the economy that overnight is completely changing. And so in appreciating that change and appreciating the cause of the change, and in being very passionate about how it shouldn't be so difficult for everybody to just be successful, a few of us were inspired to do something about it. And a lot of people are inspired to do something about it, right? There are a lot of incubators for startups. There are a lot of companies trying to help. We were inspired to do something about all of it. How do you completely build an industry or a sector? That was the mission. That was the inspiration. That media now and going forward is actually media tech, right? That musician can't succeed at all without technology, even in the sense of the microphone and speakers to play at a venue is technology. That if you're in the media industry in any context, if you're a journalist and you don't know how to use social media, you're not going to be very successful. If you're a startup and you have no grasp of how to promote what you're doing or reach people on the internet, you're not going to make it. Media is intertwined with technology, and if we can teach that, and we can help companies understand that, and we can help investors realize that, we can help everybody thrive. That was the start, and so now there's a pretty substantial group of us. We've built some platforms. We're looking at real estate. We're looking at venture funds. We've been helping startups for 5 or 6 years now throughout the world, and I think we've started to stumble into something. We've started to stumble in a way to, as we referred to it in your introduction of me, when this notion of venture development is this hybrid of economic development, venture capital. Can we actually build industries and build ecosystems designed to help investors support entrepreneurs? The answer is absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. We've seen it in other sectors. We're doing that for the media industry and media technology.
What does that look like?
Two good examples that everybody might appreciate best because they're a little bit more obvious. Example number one is something we're experiencing, unfortunately, rather substantially in the world today, which is the energy industry. and the fact that gas prices are now twice what they used to be. That if you look at the energy industry, there are places in the world that are important, physical, geographic places in the world that are important. Houston, Middle East, Russia and Ukraine, unfortunately. Right? There are places that matter. Why? Because there's infrastructure. There are the natural resources that we need, right? If you neglect that infrastructure, you neglect those natural resources, you can't make the industry work. Because it's in identifying those places that then you can put the right people in place. You can train people properly to focus on that sector. You can put companies in greater proximity so they create jobs. They provide innovation. They move capital more effectively. But then even think more broadly than that about economic development. You can steer journalists and press attention to the right places. Right? Should the journalist for the energy or clean tech industry be in Bozeman, Montana? No, that doesn't make much sense.
Yeah.
So you end up with more efficient news, more efficient journalism. The city, the economic development office, the chamber can more capably and meaningfully focus on that sector as well, because they know here in Houston we're going to do that. We're not going to do that in Phoenix because it doesn't make as much sense, right? The other great example is the healthcare industry. In a more microeconomic context, every city has to have a healthcare industry, but if you look at your city, you can probably identify the fact that most healthcare resources are in the same part of town. A couple of hospitals, all the clinics, all the labs, maybe near the university. That same idea, conceptually, they tend to coalesce around one another because of shared resources, shared experiences, shared capital, shared partnerships, and so forth. Economic development to help an industry thrive.
Beautiful.
Well, the same thing happens in media innovation. It's just not as obvious to most because in most cities, it's not as substantial as a place like Hollywood. Hollywood's a wonderful example of the point. Most places aren't as substantial as Hollywood because they maybe do a little bit of everything. Right? They've got some musicians, they've got a couple of radio shows, they've got newspapers. Well, there's not really as much reason to coalesce because there isn't really a media industry. Instead, you have media resources. You've got some media things. So can we not turn that into a media industry? Well, sure we can. Same idea. Where do they tend to be? East side of town, north side of town, west side of town. What's there, right? Are they better at video games? Maybe there's more video game stuff than there is radio. Maybe there's more of an advertising industry in your city than a news industry. So when you identify those things, that's what marketing does. That's what economic development is. When you identify those things, you can help them thrive. You can help them connect. Right? You build infrastructure. You build communities. You build groups. You build events. You build conferences, and then the role that we play in MediaTech Ventures is we teach. So we teach the founders, we teach the mentors, we teach investors how this industry works. We help connect. We put those events together. We put the communities together. And then we work with the companies and the cities to help them recognize better how to participate in a way that's meaningful to the entrepreneurs, whether that's sponsoring things or tax incentives or identifying the right kind of companies to move or relocate to a different part of town or to your town. We can collectively underwrite the risk of being an entrepreneur by moving more capital into the ecosystem so that those startups, those media tech entrepreneurs can take those risks. And in taking those risks, we innovate. In taking those risks, we create jobs. And in time, that matures more of an industry where you are than disparate media things that may not work together very well.
Wow, that's incredible, Paul. Tell us, what is your vision? What is the future you'd like to see with MediaTech Venture?
In what we're doing, to be honest, we have a very, very atypical kind of vision for the future in the sense that we're not building a company like someone says. We're building a company to product market fit, right? To solve this problem and deliver a solution, or to please customers, or to make money. Obviously, we're in it to make money, but that's not really our intention. The people that work with MediaTech Ventures, including all of our mentors and advisors in the incubators, they're all people that do this for a living anyway. That sort of like my own story about my past. When we talk to folks who we want to get involved or we think should be involved, we're actually looking at who they are as a person and whether or not they're going to do this kind of thing for the rest of their lives anyway. And we look for that because we're like that. I took stock of myself 5 or 6 years ago and said, you know what? I'm going to be working with startups and media for the rest of my life, no matter what. Why would I continue to do that myself? That's kind of silly. Why don't we build something? That there are a lot of people who have a career or have a job because they're paying for a house or paying for kids' college or saving for retirement. And then there are some people who do what they love and will always do that no matter what. I think the future needs to be a lot more like the latter. That we all should be enabled and empowered and have access to the things that make it possible for us to do what we love. And in media and innovation, and in the media industry in particular, I hope for much greater collaboration, much more sharing of data and information, much more partnership between capital and the public sector and companies to help people do that, to help people thrive on their own terms. I absolutely think it's possible. We've proven it. We've not proven it. We've not proven it worldwide and at scale yet, but we've certainly proven that it's possible. And so that's what we're seeking to accomplish, is that anybody who wants to work and almost more so live in this way should be able to. There's no reason they can't. We tear down the barriers that prevent people from being able to do so.
What are the biggest barriers?
Education and access, hands down. Education and access. That most startup or entrepreneurial education, to be frank, is lacking. And whether or not that was the case, the fact is our own traditional system of education simply can't keep up with the pace of change of innovation.
Agreed.
It just can't. And so it certainly can't keep up with the pace of change of innovation, let alone how fast media is also changing. Right? So you stick those two together, media and tech, you stick those two together. Our industry moves at lightning speed, right? If it takes years for pharmaceuticals to reach the market, in my world, it takes days for something else to change, right? And hours. It's just impossible to keep up with that. And so we need a model or a system of education that focuses just on these sectors, whether it's my sector or your sector or somebody else's sector. You need an approach to education that focuses just on that, so you can capably keep up with things and impart that to people. And then access. And access really to me actually means two things. That the media industry is one in which traditionally big companies were a dependency. Right? You had to get signed to a label. You had to have a big budget in order to get the big ad spends. You had to be a part of a big company in order to participate in media. If you wanted to be a newspaper reporter, you had to work for a formal newspaper. Right now, you can do that yourself if you'd like. That you used to have to be a part of a big company, and that created barriers to access. Right?
Yep.
What if I couldn't? What if I didn't want to? What if I didn't live there? Luckily, that's changing. But it's also access in the sense of the impact of that education, that most people aren't being informed well about how the internet works. And so they just don't have access to the information that's available, or the tools that are available, or the social networks. Right? If you want to be a music tech professional, where do you connect with people? Are they on LinkedIn? Yeah, maybe. Are they an angel list? Yeah, maybe. Right? So how do you find your peer group? It's in fact not that difficult, but those barriers still exist, and so we're breaking down those barriers to make it easier for people. Education, access. I think you see very obviously the implication of those barriers in cities that are struggling, in certain demographic groups that don't have the same access. Right? If you can almost paint this in a lens of diversity and inclusion. I think diversity and inclusion is two things. In fact, I think it's a bit of privilege and prejudice, but it's also just the fact that traditional historic models don't enable people to participate in the same way that they do across the board for everybody. That's easy to fix. That second consideration is easy to fix, right? We can open doors. We can make better connections for everyone in the world. the faster we do that, the more we do that, the more everybody is successful.
I love that, Paul. You have such a beautiful lens about the future, what it be like. Incredible. So I want to circle back to you, Paul. Have you found your true calling yet?
Have I? Yes.
And what does that look like?
What I'm doing? I'm very blessed. I'm doing what in hindsight, I'm doing what I was born to do, and I don't think many people get the opportunity to say such a thing.
That's a strong word.
That's what drives me.
How do you know?
I'm comfortable. I'm happy. I love working. And I don't just love working in the sense of a startup founder or an entrepreneur, being excited to try to build a company and solve a problem. I could be doing something completely different tomorrow in MediaTech Ventures. And I mean that in a generic sense, not in our company, but in ventures for media technology. You could tomorrow present something to me and say, hey, Paul, let's go do this too. Or instead, and I would be thrilled. I would be thrilled to help do that because, I've found who I am professionally. And that's not without struggle. Life is not without struggle. I've learned those lessons. But when you can, it's like finding somebody you love and being able to spend the rest of your life with them. That's what it's like to find yourself in a position professionally where, I don't leave the office and go home and get to crawl into bed with the person I love. It's more so that wherever I am all the time, I'm experiencing that. When I go home from the office, I'm just as happy as when I'm in the office, right? Getting to do what I do.
It's incredible, Paul. You have so much joy at everything you do. That is so inspiring.
I hope so. But I hope it's inspiring in the sense of encouraging everybody listening to be introspective, to spend some time on your own, meditate, read some more books, listen to do something different. Do something different than what you would normally do. If you exercise all the time, good for you, because I don't. But if you exercise all the time, do something completely different. Go do a movie marathon. Go rent out a theater and sit there and watch movies all day, just for the heck of it, just to see what happens, to experience life in a different way. That I hope my inspiration is that this is possible. It is possible to find and do what you love. It's not easy, and it could be a hard road along the way. But it is absolutely possible, and there are countless people throughout the world, like myself, who want to help everyone do that. Figure out what in your life might be a little off, or discover something different that maybe you didn't see before, and lean in on that. Lean in on that by connecting with people, by starting a bunch of conversations with people about your discovery. Of yourself, and you'll find helpers. You'll find people who want to support you.
I really love that, Paul. And I oftentimes tell people, I think you, I think me, I think he, I think she, I think we all like little light bulbs on this planet. And if our light bulb can be just one pixel brighter, the whole world is a brighter and happier place. So the way how I say it is follow your light, because we all have that light within us. And if you're in a situation that you don't feel like you have joy all the time, you don't feel like you love what you do all the time, follow that light. You know that. Whether it's a book that you're reading, a conversation you just had, a movie you watch, you felt inspired, you felt some part of it intrigue your interest. And that's what I call find or follow your light. So then you can shine your light bulb one pixel brighter when you really find that one thing. Just bring your joy. That's really a wonderful way to think about it. And if I may add to it, yes, sir. Maybe this has come through in the last bit of time that we've been talking here, but a lot of people struggle with that light not being on, or feeling like the light bulb was out. That's really where my motivation comes from. Encouraging everyone to appreciate that when your point is precisely correct, but that too, if
if you don't feel like you have that light bulb, or it's the wrong color, or it's the wrong type, you still got an incandescent bulb and it's too expensive. That there are people who will help you relight that. There are people who will help you explore what the differences are. How to change your light, how to turn it back on. And so if you're in one of those dark places, to make that mental health turn, if you're in one of those dark places, or life just doesn't seem right, or you're struggling financially or with health, reach out, right? Reach out, find people, connect with people, because they have that extra pixel too, right? Someone else has that extra pixel that may be the one you're looking for, that brightens yours up a little bit more, so that you find the path that you're looking for.
I love that. Beautiful said. And the one thing that I learned recently is, it's not about what, it's not about how to do X, Y, Z, it's about who. If you felt stuck, you might not have all the answers, but looking for that one person, that mentor, that friends, that dear family members, looking for that who, she or he might have that exactly the extra pixel you're just looking for all year long.
Access and education, those two hurdles that get put in place, those two hurdles that are barriers to so much of the world, to what so many are trying to accomplish. You're right. Who is a matter of access, right? Can I reach? Can I talk to? Do I know? The answer is yes. If you don't
Always
think so,
yes.
the answer is absolutely yes. That it's easier than I think people realize. And we learn from others, right? So education is also about who, right?
It's true.
From whom are you learning? From what experiences have others had that you're drawing? Who are your mentors? Who are your guides? Reach out and find different perspectives, and find different people to connect with, and find your way forward.
I love the point you just said. Who, and if you feel like you could not reach him or her, of course you can't. And that reminds me now when I was in high school, when I was stuck in this mountain town in China. And that was my teacher. He said this. He said, we are only 6 degrees separation for any other person on this whole planet. And at the time, I'm in the mountain. We don't have internet. We don't have cars. And I was like, that's not possible. I still remember that moment of me pondering in my mind, no, that is BS. I don't believe you. And now I'm thinking about, wow, now 3 decades later, I sit across to the one and the only Paul having this conversation. I was like, oh my God, yes, he is absolutely true. And yes, what a magical moment. And that just not only give me just a moment of joy, but in the same time, just want to reinforce the point you made is whoever have the extra pixel that you're looking for, knowing that he or she, of course, is within your reach too. I feel oftentimes you just need to reach out. That's all it is.
That's exactly all it is. And when you've painted a wonderful illustration about my point about the internet, that indeed before the internet, or 25 years ago,
there's no way.
Yeah, you could be on a mountain in China. You could be in the desert of Phoenix and just not be able to reach people.
Not at all.
But today, for all of the detriments and concerns and so forth about social media, the fact is you can today reach just about everyone in the world. I
so agree.
And chat and share and teach and learn and
I think
debate and argue and try to uncover misinformation. But at the same time,
it's so fun.
Connect and it's made the world a much smaller place. You know, we're able to work with literally anyone everywhere, and that's magical.
I love that. I love the magical world. And I so appreciate this because, where I come from, there's no information where if right now I'm sick, it's not matter of me going to a hospital. It's more about me thinking about, that's my auntie's cousin's sister who is a doctor. So maybe I will go asking her or his help me find an appointment, so on and so forth. You get the picture. So where I come from is opposite of access of information, where it so depends on direct family members connection for you to get anywhere, get anything done. And I just remember, as little as I remember, I feel like, wow, this is so inefficient, but there's no any other way. Versus today, I'm sitting on this side of the earth, And, hearing the conversation debate about, oh, is it too much information? Oh my God, is it too much social media, so on and so forth. But I sitting here feel like this is so magical. This is literally how I see the American dream. There's so much of everything. You can take whatever you feel like. This is such a blessing and such a magical world that we all get to take whatever that align with our heart.
I really love your observation of that because it helps illuminate that point that education is a critical piece of the puzzle.
So much.
And how quickly media is a part of absolutely everything. And in that there are pros and cons. There are advantages and disadvantages to every form of media and everything we're doing.
Of course.
That the reason the world struggled with fake news for the last 4 or 5 years is truly only because people weren't as familiar with the internet's role in news. Fake news has been around for millennia.
I was like, I'm really not surprised. Where I come from, every single day is fake news.
Right? But suddenly, right, we had a lot more people experiencing it on the internet, on social media sites, and going, oh, this fake news is terrible stuff, and how are we ever going to protect ourselves from it? Well, the way we protect ourselves from it is to learn how the media industry works and how to discern for yourself fact from fiction, because back in the 1900s there was fake news in the newspaper, and before that, right,
in my opinion, I do not think it's a fault of technology or media and so on and so forth. I think it's we human beings now, we have a different magnifier to magnify whatever that's being existing already.
Yes.
And now maybe sounds louder, maybe sounds quote unquote darker, but it's not the fault of technology or media.
Absolutely agree with that. You could almost even observe how there isn't actually more of the worst. There's actually less of the worst.
So agree.
What we are struggling with is what's called perception bias. That because we get so much more information in general, because there's so much more communication in general, because the internet has opened up the entire world to us, we're inclined to consume the worst, consume the bad, and infer that there's a lot of it. And it's terrible. And oh my gosh, it's all worse than it used to be.
That's also how our mind works.
Correct.
If I read, today's a great day, that's the title of the article, I might not going to read that. Versus, well, today something tragic happened. I was like, oh my God, now I'm hooked, I'm connected, right? So it's not really, I don't think so. I really felt it's really just how we are as a human being, how we think.
Humanity is better. Humanity is absolutely better thanks to the internet.
I 100% agree.
There are, and that's the point, right? There are experiences online where you can find toxic people. There are places that have bad posts and communication, and but there, in fact, if you look holistically about the world, it is not a worse place. We're eliminating racism. We're eliminating hate. I agree that people in general are absolutely more positive and more supportive and a closer humanity. Evident even in that quick reference I made to the perspective of the Great Migration, right?
Yeah.
That 2 years ago, the headline was the Great Resignation. How bad is the world today? We're all resigning. Companies are terrible. We can't find jobs. We're all resigning. Exactly, right? The reality is something wonderful is happening. People are waking up to the fact that they can have a better life. People are waking up to the fact that they shouldn't be putting themselves in those circumstances with bad employers. People are waking up to the fact that they can move somewhere else, migrate somewhere else, and live where they'd prefer to live, or work from home if they'd prefer to work from home. It's absolutely a great thing. But yeah, it gets spun in the negative because that's what people consume.
You know, in Chinese, the word crisis, it names, it pronounced 危机, which literally is 2 words combined: danger and opportunities. And yes,
危机.
危机. And I think in Eastern culture, right, the duality is always we being appreciated. Like they always other side of coins. I mean, of course, how can anything be just truly once and be all? Like that's never gonna be the case. And I so agree with what you said about the greatest quote-unquote destination or resignation, what's the word? It's absolutely a fantastic thing. That means people are quote-unquote waking up to their mission, to their heart, to their dream, and they follow the path. What a beautiful world we are living. Without this internet, without this technology, without this democratize the access to any information we want, this is not possible. Thinking about generation of people live in my mountain town, it's absolutely no possibility. Even today, where I come from, still extremely remote, and therefore, for them to have idea about they can Google anything, that is insane for them. So I gotta speak from my experience. It is a wonderful world we live in.
I love the word. What a wonderful word. There's a podcast maybe we should do together because it is a wonderful word. My entire life, your exploration or your questions to get to know me better. As I think about it, that's been my series of experiences, right? From Michigan to Silicon Valley, from difficult to thriving, from cancer to a better outlook on life, and then even, I praised Silicon Valley relative to Michigan, but then frankly, from Michigan to Austin. And now Austin is an incredible, wonderful place vibrant place to be. Texas in general is because of the same notion, right? Texas has had challenges in the past, and yet today it's become one of the epicenters for the world in innovation. There's always something to learn, something to draw from on the bad side of the coin toward like the good side.
As you're speaking, I start thinking about if without the bad side, does good side even exist? Without the challenges in life, can we appreciate all those wonderful wins, success, all the amazing cherry on the top? Like, in my humble opinion, I felt those two sides of coin must exist together so that we have a fuller experience of the entire journey that we are on. The way how I see it is our life is like taking a train, okay? From point A to point Z, and we meet some people, and they part ways in certain stops, and we meet new people. But along the journey, we are just here on the road trip. We don't want to see the desert the whole time. We want to see desert, we want to see ocean, we want to see lake, we want to see city, we want to see small town or big town all the way. But isn't that joy of the fun ride that we had in this journey called life?
One of the hardest things to teach startup founders is to reveal the hardships.
Why?
To reveal the difficulties. When you start a company, if you want to be a startup founder, we're taught things like the problem solution statement. And what that tends to make founders do is go, there's a problem. I have the solution. I'm now going to tell you why my solution is the best in the world, and it's going to work, and it's wonderful, and I tell you all the good.
Yep.
is my point, right? We have this tendency to immediately sell, or promote, or hype, or get you excited about how everything's figured out, and that's why it's hard to teach the fact that you actually lose credibility if you don't point out the things you're struggling with. You actually lose credibility if you don't also point out that I haven't figured everything out yet. I haven't solved every problem yet. I'm still working on this problem. That's why it's a pitch. That's why I'm raising capital. If I had all the answers, I wouldn't be raising capital, right? If my solution was perfect,
yeah,
I wouldn't even be talking to you. Frankly, you'd be using it already because I've solved everything, and it's wonderful, right? That as a startup founder, we really have to distinguish ourselves from just working at a company, right? Where you can talk about all the good because you're flushed with resources and products are in market and you've got a massive branding and advertising and customer service team behind you, and so everything is great as a company. But as a startup, no. What's difficult is it's why I love that Chinese word, that it's critical to remember that there are two sides to that coin. That you can't be solving problems if there aren't still problems. You can't be innovating if there isn't something that doesn't work yet that you're working on, right? And so it's critical as a startup founder when you're pitching, when you're talking about what you're doing, to expose that. And I find with South by Southwest is coming up. I find that when I'm talking to founders at networking events or demo events or meetups, I find that I have this tendency to pull that out of people, right? Ooh. That when I meet somebody, they'll just lean in on their elevator pitch and what they're doing and how wonderful it is and how great it's going. And I'm like, okay, so what's wrong? Like, why are you here trying to connect with people or talk to investors or meet with me if you don't need help with something, right? Tell me what you need help with. Tell me what's not working. It is the truth. You're right. It is the truth, but it's more so this appreciation that in innovation, we have to be doing something that isn't yet solved. We have to be doing something that isn't yet working. It's Steve Blank's distinction and very definition of the word startup, that it's a temporary venture in search of a business model, meaning in reverse. We don't know what the business model is. So don't ask me what the business model is because I don't know yet. I don't have customers. Don't ask me how we're making money yet. How on earth do I know?
Yeah.
If I know, then it's not a startup.
Yep.
And because it's a startup, it's a temporary venture, meaning when we figure it out, we won't be a startup anymore, right? We'll be a company. So in that startup stage that we're in, the discussion we were having about how society has to have a different culture, how people need to be nimble and flexible and move between different companies, move to different opportunities all the time. It's because a startup by definition doesn't have all the answers. There has to be something wrong. There has to be. So it is truth, but it's almost more honesty, which kind of means the same thing, but it's almost more be realistic, be honest about the circumstances. Otherwise, it's hard to believe the pitch.
But how do you balancing a founder being on one side, he or she has to be so optimistic and bullish about the future, the vision they are going after. But in the same time, if imagine presented in front of the pitch, the VC, the investor, and then also reviewing the part that the honesty, the challenges, the grind, and what is not working, right? How do you balance in that when his or her intention was to quote unquote impress, therefore getting a yes? But
because the impress has to come from a place of there is a reason I'm talking to you. There's a reason that I'm pitching and not just selling, right? That otherwise you're not actually impressing me. You're misleading me. Right? You are in fact, you're misleading me. You're painting a picture about something that isn't true. Well, that's not impressive. It's actually kind of insulting, right? That if you're trying to tell me how wonderful everything is and it's all perfect and you see it in a lot of demo events or startup pitches where you go, this is fantastic. Can I download the app right now? And they go, oh, no. We're not there yet. And I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me you're not there yet, right? So, why did you pitch it as though it's ready to go, right? Or that everything's figured out. That again, as a startup, you're not yet a company. As a startup, you don't have all the answers yet. That's the definition. So it's you impress by telling people that you've figured out what the gaps are, by overcoming those hurdles that we were talking about in a sense.
Yep.
If you don't recognize the hurdles, if you don't know what the problems are in what you're doing, if you don't see that there's help that you need, think about it pragmatically. You're more likely to fail. Well, how many people are going to help you if you can't even identify your own problems and flaws and weaknesses?
Blind spot.
Blind spots, exactly, right? So we want to know those because that's what's impressive. I want to know that you've figured out what you're struggling with. I want to know that you have a massive competitor that has to be overcome in some way. I want to know that because it helps us understand how we might be able to help you. It understands how you can help yourself in order to overcome that competitor.
So just to be completely frank here, Paul, are you recommending any startup in their own pitch, in their demo, adding that one piece or two in their competitive landscape slide or any other slide that reviewing what is his or her, not even weaknesses, but piece that they want to work on?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Without question.
Okay.
We have a whole class about that competitive analysis, for example, about how most startup pitch slide decks have a horrific competitive analysis slide.
Yep.
Where it's like, look, here are our competitors, and they all suck in some way, and we're wonderful.
I so agree.
How on earth is that possible, right? You with your team of like 3 people can afford to do all of the things that your competitors can't? Bull, right? I mean, of course, your competitors are doing things better than you, they're also doing things worse than you.
I like
right? That they have more resources in some regards, they have less resources in other regards. Maybe you have a better team or you have more experience. That honesty. It is truth. That honesty, though, is more important than being honest. It shows that you've done the work of understanding what you're working on, so that investors can get involved, not just to give you money to figure it out, but they give you money to solve those problems, right?
I love that. So it's more about reviewing what works, what doesn't work in a very objective way so that you can really see where your competitor win and where part that you can be better. So it's not really, it's really honest perspective, but just it's not as bullish as, oh my God, all my competitors sucks and I am the best because A, B, and C.
Yeah, I mean, you can almost say that backwards, right? That when you say all my competitors suck and I'm the best, most people look at that and go, yeah.
Not true.
Okay. Next. Because no, it's never true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
you could be Google or Microsoft or you could be the best company in the world and it's still not true.
It's just like any human beings. We are all work in progress.
Exactly.
So, Paul, speaking of pitches, now I just have, very specific question to ask you. Number one is, I imagine you review pitches, I don't know, 10, hundreds, thousands a week, probably. And generally, how many percentage of pitches you can say really sucks? Just a big picture.
95.
95%?
Oh, easily.
Why? Give me top 3 reasons. Top 3.
Most founders think marketing means advertising and promotions. They don't do marketing. Number one reason, hands down. That reason has been studied by economists. It's been studied by a whole bunch of venture capitalists.
What is your definition of marketing in this startup?
Study the market. You should not invest $1 or 1 hour of time in building anything. No MVP, no prototype, nothing. Until you have studied the market, you know the competitors, you know the history, you know the partners, you know the potential investors, you know how you might exit. And you've talked to a lot of people, hundreds of people.
So really just do your research, know the market, know your competitor, know your product, know the space you are in with all that before you even start investing MVP, so on and so forth.
Yep, before you even set up a company.
Yeah.
Why bother setting up an LLC, let alone a C Corp in Delaware?
Yeah.
If you haven't yet figured out what to do, that's what marketing is. Marketing is telling the company what to do. Hands down,
number one.
It's in a bunch of studies. Hands down, that is the number one cause. The number two cause is somewhat revealed in this discussion we've been having about being honest about what you're doing. The number two evidence that something is wrong is that the team lacks the diversity of skill sets and experiences to fill the gaps. That you don't have a very experienced finance industry person, except you're doing something in fintech. Well, that's just a silly gap, right? Or you're building a platform based on an advertising model, and you don't have anybody on your team who's worked in advertising or sales.
Got it.
Oh, come on, right? That somebody is missing something, some role is missing, and that's that founder hubris, that founder optimism. That I could. It's my own experience. Oh, I could do all of this. I've done startups before. I could figure it all out. Well, no, even if you can, even if you're the most brilliant startup founder or professional in the world, the fact is you can't fill every role. You can't do every job. So you've got to have those roles filled. The team, the team is the most important thing. It's the most substantial thing that people invest in. Is the number two reason, and the number three reason is evident in the asks. What you're raising money for, or what you're asking for help for. Most startup pitches raise money for marketing, to hire people, and for growth. And you look at that and be like, you can get a bank loan for that. or why don't you just get some more customers and hire what you need to get more customers, right? That when you're raising capital, if you're seeking investors, you have to point out those gaps we were talking about. You have to point out that we're raising money to go do this thing that we alone can't do. And that's going to transform us from this company, this little startup that we are today, to something much, much more substantial, right? It's not just going to grow the business or scale the company. We're going to shift from being this to being that. And that's a very hard thing to do. That's a very hard thing to figure out.
Show the result, not just like I'm raising XYZ for hire 3%, hire 2 this. It's more about what is the result of, what is the pivoting, what is the growth you are going after.
Yep. What's the result's a great word for it. A word that I often use is the outcome.
Outcome.
Right?
I love that.
That especially if you think about it as a startup and you want to raise capital, investors expect an outcome.
Yep.
Whether it's an exit or an acquisition, or you happen to be so successful you maybe go public.
Yep.
Investors get their money back because there's an incident that takes place that enables them to get paid back. That's technically an outcome. And so if you want to raise money, the best starting place is at the end. The best starting point is to go all the way to the end, the outcome.
Backwards.
I go, got it. If that's what we want to have happen in 5 years or 7 years or 10 years or 20 years, right? It could take forever. That's fine. If we want that outcome to occur, you work backwards. Yeah, that's exactly right. You work backwards and you go, got it. That means we'll have to do this in 5 years. That means we'll have to make sure we can compete against these things over here. That means we'll have to have this kind of team in place, or we'll have to build this kind of infrastructure in place. And that's what enables a founder to then look at themselves and their team and go, well, we can't do that. So we're going to have to do what instead, right? We're going to have to go hire those people or build these things or acquire that stuff. And that may require funding. Aha. There's our pitch, right? There's what enables us to achieve that outcome. And your success as a startup, your growth, your customers, those are not the outcomes. Those are just forms of validation that you're capable, that you're effectively accomplishing your mission, that you're getting there, that you're getting there. But at the end of the day, you see it in what we kind of refer to as zombie startups or zombie companies. At the end of the day, a lot of startups get to $10 million a year, $40 million a year, which would be great, right? Great business. And they just can't figure out how to get to the next stage. It's because they didn't work with this mindset of what's the outcome that you're trying to accomplish, as opposed to how do you get from here to there, work backwards, and then plug in whether or not you got the right team and study the market. They're your three things, right? Outcomes, team, market. Study the market to give you the insight to what it takes to achieve that outcome.
Talk about the outcome a little bit more, Paul. I think that's a blind spot a lot of founder has. Like, how do you define that? It's not the number of customer. It's not what are the matrix or benchmark would you use that for the outcome? To measure the outcome.
A lot of it weaves into what we've been talking about with regard to how there's a somewhat different culture in the startup sector, in the startup world. And that different culture is more mission driven. It's more vision driven and values driven than financially driven, right? If you want to start a new business to make that your profession and make a living and be successful and maybe get wealthy, great. That's a new business. There are a lot of ways to do that and a lot of resources to do that. The startup world's quite a bit different than that, because we all are the type of people who are doing this because we feel like something could be better, whatever it might be, right?
Yep.
Something could be better, and we're fixated and motivated to do something about it. When you appreciate that different culture, that honestly different society, it changes the lens of what outcome means, right? Instead of outcome meaning making enough money every year to take care of my family, or instead of outcome meaning being able to retire at 45 instead of 65. Your outcomes are more oriented to what it looks like to accomplish that mission. When have we solved the problem that we set out to solve?
So it's been meaningful to you as a company.
It has to be meaningful to you as a company. You brought up earlier when you brought up how it's not about what and how, it's about who.
Yeah.
I believe that's the framework. A long time ago, I sat down with a bunch of venture capitalists, and we were having this discussion about why pitch decks are always horrific and always the same standard template of pitch decks. And out of that series of conversations came this notion from elementary school and how humans are trained. Humans are trained to learn who, what, when, where, why, and how. In English, at least, right?
Okay.
Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Everybody who went to kindergarten in the United States remembers who, what, when, where, why, and how. And if you think about the role of education and the importance of education, because we learn that at the youngest of ages, that becomes a part of our psychology. It becomes the way we think. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. And you'll notice if you're coming to South by Southwest or we're at South by Southwest, depending on when our podcast gets up, you go to a conference, you go to a networking event, you'll notice that people are kind of trained to talk that way too. They introduce themselves that way. Hi, my name is Paul, who I'm the CEO of MediaTech Ventures. What? When? I used to be in Silicon Valley. Now I'm in Austin. When?
Wait.
Where?
Yeah.
And where, right? And here's what I'm working on. Okay, right? Here's what I'm working on. And then, I get fixated on telling you how it works. We're trained to think that way. And you made the point that who is most important, but the other thing that's most important, perhaps more important, is why.
I tell people, without the why, what does not matter.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I can tell you on and on and on about my software, my solution, my application, my scientist thing. Who cares?
I don't care.
If I don't tell you the why, you need to be here right this moment, Paul. Listen to me connecting with you for 5 minutes.
Yep. So we go through this process in our incubators, and we've got this framework, and I've done lectures about it with companies that talk about how to change the way you think about those elementary concepts. It's not who, what, when, where, why, and how. It's why, who, when, because when helps us understand the history and the future, which is opportunity. When, where, because where matters, and then what and how. And how is the least important.
I agree.
Least important when it comes to startups, because in fact, what you're doing is trying to figure out how it might work, not how it does work. If we know how it does work, it's not a startup.
This also applies to life as well.
Exactly.
Sometimes you need to know the how, the least, once you figure out the why and the what.
Yep.
And everything in between.
And that's the subtle distinction between new businesses and business in general from startups and startup pitches. It's why the examples of how most startup pitches are poor is so obvious that if you're telling me how, if you're fixated on explaining to me how it works, and you're so focused on how it works and what it is, then either you must be an existing business model, but you're pretending to be a startup. Because if you know how it works, right? We know how a podcast studio works. You can go start one tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we know how an accounting practice works. You can go start one tomorrow and get help with that, right? That's pretty obvious. If you're a startup, you can't know that stuff. But if you're fixated on the how and you're certain that this is the way it's going to work and this is what we're doing, you either lose credibility or you're wrong. You have to be wrong. Otherwise, you're not a startup. So you have to be wrong. And so that's why the why is so much more important and the team is so much more important. And understanding the market, which is the when and the where, is so much more important. And so when you train your psychology to pitch differently and think differently or talk differently or just prioritize things differently, as a team of founders, as a team in a startup, constantly be talking about why. Constantly. Why are we doing that? Oh, because I think the homepage would be better if we did it that way. Okay, but why? Why do you think that? Is this your opinion, or do we have data, or do we have right? Well, I don't know. I think so. Well, okay, I value your opinion, but we're here to solve problems, right? And so you've got to constantly be asking why, to challenge everybody to iterate, to pivot, iterate, improve, solve problems along the way. And if you're not comfortable talking about what those problems are and exposing your gaps and asking for help, again, you either lose credibility or you're wrong, because you've got to uncover what those problems are so you can get help with them.
What is your why, Paul?
I've never put it so eloquently, but hopefully it's somewhat evident in what we've been talking about. My why is that the world should not struggle as much as it does economically.
Beautiful.
Period. There's a little more subtle to that. Obviously, it's media related. But that, honestly, that has more to do with just me personally and who I am and my enjoyment of movies and music and working in advertising and so forth, right? That's more so professionally who I am. The reason my why for what we're doing is it shouldn't be so difficult. It can be incredibly difficult to understand how to talk to investors or to work with cities or to try to get things done with universities or different countries. And I don't comprehend why there's any excuse for that whatsoever. That information is freely available. Education could be freely available. Data, transparency, direction. This information age has made it possible for us all to connect, for us all to know, for us all to take advantage of and leverage and do. And yet we don't because of hurdles. So we're trying to tear down those hurdles and make it easier for everybody so that we can all thrive.
I really appreciate you, Paul, how you experience your own hardship and yet now you use as a mission to not let anyone else experiencing that. In other words, you bring all the love to others so he or she can really skip those hurdles and go directly to their light, to their joy, to whatever they love to do in life. I love that. My second to the last question, Paul, is what would you say to aspiring entrepreneurs or the entrepreneur in their journey? What do you tell her or him? One thing. There's so many.
Yeah. I'm a little bit unusual in saying this, but because you said aspiring entrepreneurs, what I actually point out is you can't be an aspiring entrepreneur. You either are one or you're not. You can't learn to be. Entrepreneur is not a job description. It's not a role at a company.
Is that pregnant? You can be half pregnant. You can either yes or no.
No. In fact, it's no. Actually, sort of the other way around, right? That you can be an aspiring. You can aspire to be pregnant.
Yeah.
There's a process to do that, which we'll talk about on another show.
Different show, different night.
That thinking about Say's distinction of entrepreneur and that observation that there's certain types of people that are just different from business owners. You can become a business owner.
That's so different.
Entrepreneur is a personality. By some opinions, it's a personality flaw because it's so prone to failure. It's so prone to mental health issues because of the challenges associated with people who are entrepreneurial. But the fact is, it's a certain type of person. That now I say that though because I think you can aspire to be like that. You need to force yourself into high risk circumstances, and you need to push yourself to get comfortable with failure and change and disruption, because those are the qualities of somebody who's entrepreneurial. They seek that. And so if you're aspiring, it's not as simple as start a business or take a class. That's how you can learn what it means to be an entrepreneur, not how to be one.
It's interesting.
You have to force yourself outside of a box.
Get out of the box, everybody. My last question, Paul, is for folks who are coming to South by Southwest first time this Friday, what would you tell him? What would you tell her? This will be my 16th. Oh my goodness!
Except for the last couple of years. So first I'd say welcome back.
Yeah.
We're so excited to get back to getting together and seeing people. It was maybe 14 years ago, an angel investor back in California when I would come over said this to me. He goes, your job at South by Southwest is not to learn, and it's not to have too much fun. Too much fun. It's to meet as many people as you possibly can. And I think it is to learn. He might have been wrong about that. However, the other side of what he said really stuck with me and has proven to be amongst the best advice I've ever gotten in life. That your job at South by Southwest, the one thing I can advise most is move. Talk to somebody for 5 or 10 minutes and move on. Go to 6 different events one night, right? Events run for an hour or 2 or 3 hours. There's no reason for you to be there for 2 or 3 hours. Move, because there are so many different things going on. By some counts, there are as many as 80,000 people in town. It is bigger than the Super Bowl. Economically for the city of Austin. This is a massive, massive experience.